They choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Still to come, but now we join John Craven for News Round. It's coming. It is, honest, I swear.
Pictures of the planet Uranus. More of its secrets may be revealed. Hello again. The secrets of the planet Uranus, 3 billion kilometers from Earth, are about to be uncovered. The American spacecraft Voyager 2 is preparing to pass close to the planet tomorrow, and it'll be sending back the most detailed pictures yet taken of Uranus. The planet itself was only discovered 200 years ago, and Voyager 2 has taken 8 years of space travel to reach it. Newsround space editor Reg Turnell has been watching Voyager's progress.
Voyager's pictures are already showing some detail of this gassy planet. And though they're not visible here, we now know that Uranus has about 30 moons, compared with Earth's 1. Marvellous Jupiter and Saturn pictures were sent back by Voyager on its way to Uranus. And tomorrow, in a 6-hour close encounter, Voyager should send about 40 Uranus pictures, and then swivel round to look at the moons. Pictures of Miranda, small and mysterious, will take 3 hours to travel back to Earth, but only 4 minutes for Voyager's cameras to record in a series of squares. Since it will pass Uranus at 60,000 kilometers per hour, there's not much time to study the murky, smoggy atmosphere. No one thinks that there's any life so far from the Sun. But Voyager's journey isn't finished yet. In 1989, it's due to explore Neptune, and after that to find out if the so-called Death Star really exists. Scientists think that may have passed so close to Earth millions of years ago that it killed all the dinosaurs. It'll be the weekend before Uranus's detailed colour pictures have been processed, and on Saturday the shuttle is off again, looking for Halley's Comet. 2 women among the 7 crew aboard will include teacher Krista McAuliffe, who will now be giving the first lessons from space next Wednesday.
Uranus is nearly 2 billion miles away, the furthest planet ever visited by a spacecraft. Scientists are calling it a crescendo of discovery. Voyager took off from Earth 8 years ago. Almost 2 years into its journey, it reached Jupiter. 2 years after that, it flew past Saturn, discovering a ring structure which astonished scientists. Since then, it's taken 4 years to reach Uranus. In 3 years' time, it'll be even deeper in space, visiting Neptune.
And these are the pictures, sent back across 2 billion miles of space by cameras untouched for 8 years. A disappointment, perhaps, but astronomers say once they've been processed through computers, they'll prove of great interest. Earlier, Voyager had sent back pictures of the 9 rings around Uranus.
The rings are incredibly thin. They're not like the rings of Saturn, which absolutely zap you in the eye when you look at them from Earth. In fact, the rings of Uranus can't be seen very well at all from Earth. They're very, very narrow, and they're incredibly dark.
Voyager's discoveries should help scientists learn more about the origins of the solar system. Analysing the information will take many months.
Astronomers working on the mission have called them incredible, and in Britain the reaction has been equally enthusiastic.
I think the pictures are incredible, and when you think they've come through 2,000 million miles of space, they're near nigh perfect. We're seeing Uranus for the first time, absolutely in real colour. The rings are very exciting too. We now know there are 10 rings going around Uranus in all. A newly discovered one has just popped up in between the outermost ring and the inner body of the rings. We still don't know what they're made of. They're made of very, very dark material indeed. 15 moons in total, the most exciting pictures of all, because it shows that these moons, which are much smaller than our own moon and a heck of a long way from the sun, appear to have been geologically active. For instance, one of them's got a kind of donut on its surface. We don't know what that is at all. A couple of them have actually got very dark material inside their craters, which looks as if it's welled up from inside, or maybe even been deposited from outer space. But weirdest of all is Ariel, one of the moons we already knew about. Its surface looks just like Antarctic pack ice, as if the whole thing has been moving around under some kind of heat welling up from inside. There's grooves and all sorts of new features, which can only have been produced very, very recently.
Voyager's success has offset some of the disappointment among American space officials at the postponement of the latest launch of the Space Shuttle. The Shuttle Challenger was due to go up on its 10th flight today, but bad weather near the launch site led the forecasters to recommend waiting until tomorrow. Challenger will carry a woman schoolteacher into space. She'll conduct 2 lessons from orbit.
Caused it to be postponed yesterday. Among the 6 astronauts on the mission is a 37-year-old schoolteacher. If all goes to plan, blast-off will be less than 2 hours from now. During the 6-day flight, the crew will study Halley's Comet. They'll release a satellite to collect data on the comet and then retrieve it and bring it back to Earth. The mission is being nicknamed the Schoolhouse in Space. American teacher Krista McAuliffe, who was picked from 11,000 applicants, will be holding classes from the shuttle for children right across the United States.
You disappointed? Oh, sure, but it's going to go tomorrow.
Uranus, which they've received from the spacecraft Voyager 2. About 6,000 close-ups of the planet and its moons have been sent the 2 billion miles back since Voyager made its closest encounter with Uranus on Friday. The scientists say pictures of the moon, Miranda, show bizarre geological forms.
So if you can imagine taking all the bizarre geologic forms in the solar system and putting them on one object, you've got it in front of you.
The vital Challenger is stuck on the launch pad waiting for the wind to drop. Earlier, technicians had to change a faulty screw because the crew hatch was stuck open. The countdown has started again, but everything now depends on the weather. It has delayed the mission once already. Meanwhile, scientists in America are astonished and delighted with pictures taken by the spacecraft Voyager 2. They're still studying its photographs of the moons around the planet Uranus, 3 billion kilometers from Earth. Bob Friend reports.
As Voyager 2 continues on its space odyssey, Uranus is now a receding crescent. But there are still fascinating pictures coming in of the planet's 5 major moons. This is Miranda, 300 miles in diameter, orbiting less than 100,000 miles from Uranus. Geologists have been marveling over the clear images of its rugged surface. Craters, valleys, mountain ranges, easily discernible fault lines, and even perhaps evidence of an ancient ice flow. Pictures sent back to Earth by the cameras of a spacecraft operating 2 billion miles away in the cloudy light of deep space. And there's more to come. Scientists say instruments on Voyager revealed more information which has yet to show up on photographs. If that isn't enough, scientists were able to record Voyager being bombarded by millions of microscopic dust particles as it left on its long journey to the planet Neptune.
And in Britain, a leading astronomer wants to get an old observatory working again, so that we can learn much more about the stars and planets. Norman Walker from the Greenwich Observatory says Britain needs more large telescopes and other equipment for research into astronomy. He hopes that the Lockyer Observatory in East Devon will become the British centre for such research. Martin Tasker reports.
Sir Norman Lockyer was one of the world's leading astronomers, and he devoted much of his life to developing this observatory on a hilltop near Sidmouth in East Devon. Now, of the 3 domes, one is derelict, the other run down, and only the third houses a telescope suitable for research purposes. Development, though, needs money, and that's what senior research scientist Norman Walker is trying to raise in order to establish some kind of future for Britain's up-and-coming stargazers.
I foresee a time when in this country there are no facilities to educate children or university students in the use of telescopes or in observing things in a thorough manner. That's what I'm trying to sort of prevent.
The local council is now negotiating to buy the observatory, but development plans are still unclear.
For the Space Shuttle technicians, NASA had to postpone the launch of Challenger for a third day because they couldn't find the right screwdriver.
The first real civilian like you and me ever en route to space. A historic moment for teaching, for a teacher she is, strapped in the nose of the shuttle. But the moment was eclipsed by a stripped screw. This handle for closing the crew's hatch has to come off before blast-off. The damaged screw defied brute strength. It defied a hastily produced modern cordless drill. The battery went flat. Electric power was introduced, but still there was no headway.
The hardness of the head of the bolt is making it very difficult to drill into.
So after 2 hours, they resorted to a hacksaw, and finally, with the offending item displayed, the most sophisticated piece of technology, the shuttle, had been freed from its bondage. But by now, the tossing trees beyond the launch pad displayed a new problem, crosswinds. So those first ever lessons from space, the teacher says she's going to be late. Jon Snow, News at 10, Washington.
Hello again. Within the last few minutes, we've heard there's been an explosion on board the Space Shuttle Challenger. The liftoff was delayed, but everything looked fine until almost a minute into the flight. Then, just after the rocket boosters were due to detach from Challenger, there was a big explosion. No one's sure exactly what happened. Recovery ships are standing by. James Wilkinson has been watching the pictures.
It was the 25th shuttle flight and the 10th of Challenger. The explosion occurred 9 miles into the flight. There was no warning. It was described as a giant burst of flame by onlookers. Seconds before the explosion, they were given the go-ahead for the next stage of the flight, and everything seemed to be going well. On board were 7 astronauts, including the first civilian, a teacher, Krista McAuliffe. The mission was due to last 6 days. There's no information yet about why the explosion happened. The voice of mission control has been silent. It seems unlikely any of the astronauts survived the catastrophe. A parachute was seen coming from the shuttle, but the astronauts are not equipped with parachutes, and it could just be one of the rocket motors coming down. More information later.
And now for the rest of the day's news. 3 stars from the children's programme Grange Hill are backing a new bid to try to stop children smoking. They presented a petition signed by 200 health groups to the Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, who decides how much tax the government puts on cigarettes. Helen Rollason reports. And there'll be more reports about the disaster on the Space Shuttle on BBC 2 at 5:10. And that's all from Newsround. Bye-bye.
With a special news report.
The Space Shuttle Challenger has exploded and disintegrated shortly after takeoff. It was carrying a crew of 7, including a woman teacher, and there are no reports of any survivors. We join cable news networks with pictures of that launch.
And liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Roll, Challenger. Good roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange.
Liftoff this morning at 11:38 after a couple of delays for several hours.
4%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%.
The family of Krista McAuliffe, the first civilian and the first school teacher ever to be launched into space aboard a shuttlecraft, was at the Kennedy Space Center watching today's liftoff. This is not only, of course,
2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3
let's watch
nautical miles, downrange
as we see what happens.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Roger, go with throttle up.
Close mics.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
Well, as you saw, it had been a perfect takeoff in brilliant sunlight shortly before noon Florida time. The space vehicle had successfully completed its standard roll shortly after takeoff, but moments later there was that flash of fire from the shuttle's main fuel tank, an explosion, and the entire vehicle, as you've just seen, disintegrated. As the debris fell to the ocean about 9 miles downrange from Cape Canaveral launch site, US military aircraft and naval ships headed for the site for the seemingly hopeless task now of looking for survivors. They're looking too for any debris that may give a clue as to what went wrong. Already officials at NASA are talking about icicles on that main fuel tank as possibly providing a clue as to what caused the explosion. This was to have been the 25th mission shuttle. Well, now we're going to join ABC News from Washington. No, we're not, I beg your pardon, we're going to CNN, the cable news network, for their latest pictures from the scene. These, in fact, are pictures that were recorded earlier. I beg your pardon, I thought we were taking a live feed. These were the crowds traditionally watching the takeoff. Always a most spectacular sight.
Huge fireball and a huge cloud of smoke.
The cable news network covering the entire event live for American television. We were monitoring that in London.
You see concern.
On board, let me remind you, there were 7 members of the crew, including the first civilian in space, a woman teacher.
And then the realization sets in.
Their jobs included launching and then recovering a satellite whose job it was to monitor the latest progress of Halley's Comet. And also they had on board a second satellite whose job was to join the communications network for the shuttle program. So those people there watching just moments before the explosion took place. Those pictures recorded earlier by the cable news network. Well, the President, Ronald Reagan, was in the middle of a meeting when the news broke, and his spokesman, Larry Speaks, went straight to waiting journalists to give them a briefing.
We do not have any more information than is being provided to the public at this time. The way the President found out about it is he was in the Oval Office with a group of senior staff preparing for some questions with a group of network correspondents and anchors that were having lunch in the White House today regarding the budget and the State of the Union. The Vice President and the Foreign Policy Advisor, John Poindexter, came in with others and informed the President that the news had just broken. We immediately adjourned our Oval Office meeting and went into an adjoining room, the President's study, where there's a television, and the President then began to review television reports of the explosion there shortly after the launch. So once again, the President is concerned, he is saddened, he is very anxious to have more information on it. At the moment, as I say, we're learning most of our information from what the public is getting.
What is your best information as to the condition of the crew, Larry, at this point?
We don't have any more information than what is being provided to the public on television. Hopefully later we will be able to get some, and that's the President's first priority, is to find out what information that is available. We just don't have any more. No, we have not from the Oval Office.
Will this affect in any way the plans for the State of the Union tonight?
I don't believe so. I'm certain that the President will feel compelled to mention this, depending on the outcome of what we learn here in a few minutes.
Will it affect the shuttle program, Larry?
Well, that's hard to say, here in 15 or 20 minutes after an incident of this type is concerned. I'm sure it will not affect the United States' determination to consider to continue the exploration of space and all the benefits we've received from it. While this is indeed tragic, it certainly will not deter the United States in its interest in space exploration.
Well, with all the problems that the shuttle has had, will any substantial reevaluation be done of the program itself?
Well, once again, you're very premature in asking a question concerning the future of the space program. The United States has met adversity many times before in the space program. It is one of the most effective and successful programs of that type that any country has ever undertaken.
President Reagan's spokesman Larry Speakes talking just a short while ago in Washington. Not since 1967 has America had to face up to a similar tragedy in its space program. 3 died then as a part of the Apollo program. The rocket then hadn't taken off. Congress has just gone into recess, but President Reagan has announced that his State of the Union message later on tonight will go ahead as scheduled. I'm joined now by Heather Cooper, who is the president of the British Astronomical Association and who was in ITN this afternoon and had the unfortunate experience of being able to watch those pictures as they came in. Heather, as an initial reaction, what do you think went wrong?
It's difficult to say, Alistair. I've looked at the pictures and I've seen the slowed down version as well. It looks to me initially as if something went wrong with the shuttle itself. If you look at the pictures in slow motion, it looks as if the right-hand engine of the shuttle itself exploded. You could see a tongue of flame coming out of it. That is right over the liquid oxygen fuel tank, which feeds the liquid oxygen from that enormous tank, the big brown tank that you see lifting off the shuttle, into the shuttle itself. So an explosion would have ignited the liquid oxygen, and that would have led to an immediate explosion of the whole assembly. And I think, as you saw, the whole of Challenger was just engulfed by flame. Nobody would have stood a chance.
That central tank you were describing is, as I understand it, liquid fuel, and would that have explained the flash fire that we saw in those pictures?
Yes, absolutely. You probably saw at the same time, again, if you look at the replay of the film, the 2 solid fuel boosters, which give shuttles such a tremendous thrust on takeoff, they were actually ejected after that happened. The interesting point about it is that the explosion occurred at no specific state during the shuttle countdown. It wasn't when they should have ejected the solid fuel boosters. It happened 1 minute, 15 seconds into launch. And it's not clear what happened, except there does seem to have been a fault in the shuttle's own motors, its own engines. But again, I think we'll have to look at the videos again and see what wreckage is left.
The initial reaction from the NASA officials monitoring the takeoff and obviously the explosion itself were talking earlier about the phenomenally low temperatures, even for Florida, and the possibility of icicles having been spotted on that main fuel tank, and yet they went ahead with the launch. Does that mean that they were hoping all was well, or that they had checked it out and that all was indeed well? What do you think?
What this could have led to, now I suspect that they have actually gone off in low temperatures before, and there have been icicles around the shuttle before. I can recollect in the past seeing many large icicles hanging from the gantry. There is a possibility that the low temperatures could have led to contraction of the metal, which maybe, again I'm guessing, I think we're all guessing at the moment, it could have led to the fact that the sudden rush of heated fuel through a metallic container which had contracted could have led to some sort of stress. That could have led to a sudden rip in the engine. Again, we don't know. But as you know, the launch had been aborted twice because of various situations. And I think they were wise to go for this particular launch. The wind was getting up. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with the launch facilities, and I think they are wise to go. They have had low temperatures in the past. I'm sure this wasn't the cause.
You've been out there and you've witnessed launches. What are the pressures that are on the people who have to take those frontline decisions?
Their pressures are absolutely enormous, but of course the Americans are very used to them by now. This would have been the 25th shuttle launch, and they have checked this beast over. It's a very, very efficient way of launching people into space as far as we know. There have been no disasters, although ironically you mentioned earlier that in 1967 we lost 3 of the Apollo astronauts in the first Apollo 1 disaster, which was a fire on the launch pad. And I'm afraid I've noticed, in fact, to this very, it's almost exactly 9 years to this day when that disaster occurred.
Okay, Heather Cooper, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. For those viewers who have just joined us, let me tell you the reason we're on air at the moment, live and going continuously, is because we bring you the very sad news that the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded on takeoff about an hour ago. There were 7 people on board, including the first civilian, a woman teacher. And I've just been told that the explosion occurred at about the time Challenger was to enter a period of maximum aerodynamic pressure. So if there were any faults with the body of the ship itself or its fuel tanks, that is the very moment they would have been exposed. Now, our Washington correspondent, John Snow, has been monitoring events there and brings us the very latest information from the United States. Here's John.
Unprecedentedly cold weather overnight in normally warm Florida had left vital parts of the Shuttle Bay covered in ice. All morning, we could see on our television monitors employees of NASA, the Space Research Area, trying to clear the ice, and nobody, when the astronauts sat down to breakfast, the teacher there on the left, the main crew on the right, thought that anything with this shuttle mission was at all wrong. They clambered into their crew quarters just as they had yesterday when they'd attempted to take off, but it had been stalled by a problem with the hatch door. Everything looked extremely normal, and those of us that have monitored these flights saw this one as simply number 25 as the countdown went ahead.
1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and
as it always has done, absolutely perfect. Fire belching from the rear of the launch vehicle as it steamed up into the air, turned exactly on cue. All the instructions from the ground all seemed perfectly normal. And yet there has been a premonition that something might go wrong with a shuttle launch sooner or later.
Normal throttles for most of the
This
flight,
didn't seem to be it,
104%.
though.
We'll throttle down to 65% shortly.
The next instruction may have proved critical. It was the moment
Engines at 65%.
the instruction
3
came
engines
to go
running
to
normally.
the
3
full
good fuel
throttle.
cells. 3 good APUs. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up.
This, though we didn't know it, was the moment of disaster, a shattering explosion. Yet everything seemed to go on as normal.
Range distance 7 nautical miles.
And then there was silence from mission control. Nothing. No explanation. We just waited for some signal from ground control.
Controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
We thought that might be a signal of hope. It wasn't. It was a paramedic making for the crash area, but no sign of survival. Back in Washington, a priest intoned prayers at a gathering of the House of Congress. Washington thrown into shock.
Off Florida. Let us pray.
They stood in silence as at the White House, the press was summoned
launch.
to hear
So once
what
again,
the
the
President had
President
said of it.
is concerned. He is saddened. He is very anxious to have more information on it. At the moment, as I say, we're learning most of our information from what the public is getting.
What is your best information as to the condition of the crew, Larry, at this point?
We don't have any more information than what is being provided the public on television.
Throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
And we're still awaiting more information from NASA as to what really went wrong. Was it something to do with the frozen conditions? No one knows yet. But these pictures will stand as a memorial not only to those who died, but to the dangers of space exploration. This is John Snow for ITN in Washington.
Well, as we heard a moment ago, reports have come out from Cape Canaveral that at the moment of explosion, the body shell of the fuel tank was under its maximum atmospheric pressure. That means that if there were any structural faults in it, any cracks that had developed because of the phenomenal change in temperature between the freezing conditions that were there before takeoff and the enormous temperatures that occur on takeoff, once those huge engines are going, that's the very moment that it could have occurred. Heather Cooper, who is still with us, president of the British Astronomical Association, does that at least make mechanical sense as a plausible theory?
Yes, it does make complete sense as a plausible theory. As I said before, there have been low temperature conditions at Florida. It does have these rather bad winters. But the shuttle has been tested over and over again. As you know, in the early stages, it was the problem of the thermal tiles. When they kept falling off, they were worried about re-entry.
Can I just interrupt you there, Heather? Sorry, we have now got a live feed from Mission Control, and we're going over there now.
Teams delayed in getting into the area because of debris continuing to fall from very high altitudes for as long almost as an hour after ascent. Those teams in place now in the search area. We will provide additional information as it becomes available to us. This is Mission Control, Houston.
We'd like to conclude our coverage of the 7 people, recalling who the 7 people aboard this morning's mission were and what their assignments were. Michael Smith, commander in the Navy, had the role of pilot on this Challenger launch. He was born in 1945 in Beaufort, North Carolina. He became a NASA astronaut in 1980. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy. He got an MS degree in aeronautical engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School. Smith flew A-6 intruders and also completed a Vietnam cruise assignment while assigned to attack squadron aboard the USS Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier. He had been awarded the Navy Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 Air Medals, 13 Strike Flight Air Medals, and the Navy Commendation Medal with a V. That's the Navy Unit Citation and the Vietnam Cross of Gallantry with Silver Star for his role in Vietnam. Michael Smith, the pilot of the Challenger.
Cable News Network's live tribute there to the commander of the Space Shuttle Challenger, which, if you're just joining us live, let me remind you, just over an hour ago, exploded on takeoff. There are no reports of any survivors among the 7 crew. The 6 professional astronauts, led there by Michael Smith, who is 40 years old, and, of course, the teacher that we've talked about, Christina McAuliffe. The incident itself occurred about 1 minute and 40 seconds after takeoff. There aren't, at the moment, any firm evidence, no firm evidence as to what caused it. The theories that are emerging at the moment from NASA sources, let me hasten to add, not from what we're merely surmising, is that the low temperatures that were experienced in Florida, and indeed had delayed the takeoff on 2 previous occasions with strong crosswinds as well, may have caused a fundamental change in temperature of the major fuel tank. That appeared to rupture, as I say, about 2 minutes after takeoff. There was a flash of flame that then ignited the entire recovery vehicle. We heard just a few moments ago, live from the Space Center, that recovery vehicles had been sent to the site. The quote was, "We're checking with recovery vehicles to see what can be done at this point. Contingency procedures are in effect. The vehicle has exploded, and we're awaiting word from any recovery forces downrange." Those forces include, of course, military aircraft that will be scouring the entire region, helicopters taking a closer look to see if there's any debris there that may give clues as to what went wrong, and, of course, naval vehicles to try and pick up the debris as well. But at the moment, there are no reports from the United States as to any pieces of debris that may give clues, and certainly at the moment, no indications at all of survivors. Let me just remind you that President Reagan was in a meeting when he was given the information. He's scheduled tonight to give the State of the Union address, normally a very upbeat occasion for a President of the United States. He'll want to try and reassure people over the budget deficit, but today is not a day to be doing that. He'll be trying to reassure them in the face of what must be seen across the other side of the Atlantic as being a national disaster. We now have a profile of one of the crew members that has been compiled by American television. This is a tribute to one of the crew members, and it comes to us from the US.
There were 7 people aboard the Space Shuttle when the disaster struck shortly after launch this morning at Kennedy Space Center. The spacecraft commander was Francis R. Dick Scobie. He was born May 19th, 1939. He was in the Air Force. He fought in Vietnam. He'd logged about 6,500 hours in 45 different kinds of aircraft. Scobie was pilot of the STS51-C Challenger mission in 1984. That was the mission which retrieved and repaired aboard the shuttle the ailing Solar Maximum Mission satellite.
Tribute to another member of the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger, who it would appear, by all the evidence available to us, died just over an hour ago. We're going to show you those pictures again that were shown live on American television and recorded here at ITN, and I'm going to ask Heather Cooper if she can talk us through what she thinks occurred.
It seems to me as if after about a minute and a half into launch today, I'm just going for what I can see. It looked as if the right-hand engine of the shuttle, which was actually powering up at the time for maximum thrust, exploded. Now, the right-hand engine of the shuttle is right over the feed of liquid oxygen from that enormous fuel tank, and I think that just would have ignited the whole thing, and the whole thing blew up.
Heather Cooper, looking at those pictures, being coldly realistic, is there any chance at all of survivors?
No, this is the one, if it's a design fault on the shuttle, this is it. The first shuttles to go up actually did have ejector seats because then you had 2 pilots and no crew. Of course, the whole glory of the shuttle is you can take many people into space all at once to do various experiments, but of course it's impossible to have ejector seats for all of them. So there is no way that anybody could have escaped. If there is a malfunction early on in the launch, there is a kind of device whereby you slip down in baskets, rather like a kind of basketball game, and you're sort of wanged into a net down the bottom. But that's if there are no explosions on board, and it's an immediate release. But in this stage, and at that state of the explosion, there would be no chance of survival at all. And the parachute we saw in some of the earlier footage, I think, was coming from a military plane with people going down to look for survivors. But I can't see how anybody could have survived an explosion like that.
I think the Americans were telling us a little earlier that it was probably a paramedic, on the off chance that there may have been someone to attend to.
That's
right,
yes.
You're firm in your own conviction that there will be no one to be found.
And I think the Americans are basically saying that themselves, that they all must have died in the explosion.
Now, Larry Speakes was questioned, as you saw live there from Washington, by American correspondents who were saying, what future now the shuttle program? In the last 6 months, they've had a whole chapter of delays and problems. I want to ask you 2 things. One is it your view that the shuttle program will now be set back? And secondly, is it your view that there is undue pressure on the shuttle program because of the competition from the European Ariane project?
Taking the first question first, it's obvious the shuttle program will be set back, partly because they were going to launch another relay satellite on this mission, which would have actually speeded up communications with shuttle and would have made shuttle flights more routine. As I said earlier on, it is almost 9 years to the day since Grissom, Chaffee and White died in the Apollo 1 disaster. Because there was pressure on the Americans then to compete with the Russians and get the first man to the moon, they rallied around very, very quickly, and within a year and a half of that disaster, they'd actually got men going behind the moon and back again, which was a phenomenal recovery. While at the moment there is not pressure, I think, to have men going into space to actually show their power, I don't think they're going to rush things. I think they'd be very, very silly to actually rush things.
And what about the competition from the Europeans?
There isn't competition from Ariane, in a way, because the Shuttle and Ariane have 2 completely separate roles to play. One is that Ariane launches satellites to a very, very high geostationary orbit. That's to say about 23,000 miles above the Earth's surface, where the satellites rotate around the Earth at the same speed at which the Earth rotates underneath. So they appear to hover above one spot on the Earth's surface. And you can use those satellites for telecommunications and, well, generally that kind of thing. The shuttle can launch space probes into much smaller orbits, and then, if necessary, they can then reboost themselves to go off into missions into deeper space. And I'm thinking in particular that the shuttle later on this year was due to have launched 2 probes in May, one of which was going to go off and visit the planet Jupiter and send probes into its atmosphere. All these missions are obviously going to be held up now.
In short, to seek if it's possible to put a positive tone on these tragic events, the men and women who are involved in these programs will press on. Their mission will continue.
Absolutely. This will make them even more determined, I think, for the memory of those who've gone in this disaster.
Heather Cooper, thank you very much indeed. We're live reporting on the tragic news that the Space Shuttle Challenger, the 25th mission in that program, took off about an hour and a quarter ago, and within 2 minutes of takeoff, exploded and was destroyed. The entire vehicle and its engines disintegrated. There were 7 people on board, 6 of them professional astronauts, and 1 a woman teacher, the first civilian in space. Fuller details in Channel 4 News at 7 and on IP.
You could see right before the
There were 7 astronauts on board, one of them a woman schoolteacher. All of them are believed to have been killed.
between the external tank and the shuttle.
It's too soon to say what went wrong, but it's certainly by far the worst disaster in American space history. And it was a disaster watched with horror by people at the Kennedy Space Center and by television viewers across America.
Grandstands.
The 25th Space Shuttle mission from the Kennedy Space Center has ended in disaster. The billion-dollar craft, Challenger, exploded like a firebomb 9 miles out from Cape Canaveral, 1 minute and 13 seconds after liftoff. There were 7 people on board, and it's thought there was no way that they could have survived. One of them was a female schoolteacher, Krista McAuliffe. She'd been chosen out of 11,000 teachers to be the first civilian not connected with the space program to go into space. The conditions were perfect. As one commentator put it, you could see for miles. But, as Tim Sebastian reports, it was a mission which was to turn into a major catastrophe.
Delayed and delayed again, the shuttle Challenger was ready for its 10th flight from Cape Canaveral. 7 crew members on board.
1 and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
The delay today had been for 2 hours due to ice, but the go-ahead was given in clear skies and near-perfect conditions. This was NASA's final command.
Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up.
And there we see the explosion just after NASA told the astronauts aboard the Shuttle Challenger to go at full throttle up. And there you see the strange configurations of the smoke and the burning shuttle. This is the 10th flight for the Shuttle Challenger. And again, the first time there has been an accident of this type after the launch from the Cape.
The debris rained down into the Atlantic due east of the Kennedy Space Center. Recovery ships were on their way within minutes. The immediate explanation, one of 2 solid fuel rocket boosters had detonated. There was one immediate cause for hope, but only one.
Now we see a parachute coming down from the sky. That a very happy, a very welcome sign. Again, this explosion took place, as you saw, about 28 miles downrange, and now we see the glorious view of a parachute coming down. There's one parachute. Perhaps there are others. Again on board, Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, making her first flight.
Houston, we are coordinating with recovery forces in the field. Range safety equipment, recovery vehicles intended for the recovery of the SRB in the general area. Those parachutes believed to be paramedics going into that area.
At the White House.
Tim Sebastian reporting, and we'll be going back to Tim Sebastian for more news later in the programme. Well, President Reagan learnt about the explosion while he was having lunch in the White House. He's said to have watched a videotape of the disaster in stony silence. The appalling spectacle was seen by millions of people across the United States live on television. They included 1,200 pupils at the school in New Hampshire where Krista McAuliffe, the first civilian in space, taught. When the disaster occurred, they were immediately sent back to their classrooms. The space shuttle has been dogged by problems. Launch after launch has been postponed. One space veteran called it only this morning a comedy of errors. Philip Hayton has been looking at the history of the shuttle.
The first shuttle was launched nearly 5 years ago. It was put into orbit by rockets and landed back on Earth on a runway like an aircraft. The shuttle could be used up to 100 times. It was hailed as a triumph for America's space know-how. As President Nixon put it, the shuttle would transform the space frontier of the 1970s into familiar territory. Despite its success, though, some experts reckoned it wasn't necessary to put men into space.
The critics said it could all be done by machines. This was the 25th shuttle mission, and from the beginning it was plagued by problems. First, there were storms in the area delaying the launch. Then there were technical problems which further hindered the launch. The door wouldn't shut properly. Then, by the time they'd fixed the door, strong winds forced another delay. The bad weather meant the astronauts had to abort another takeoff. Among the 7 astronauts on today's mission was the first American citizen who did not come from the armed forces. She was Krista McAuliffe, a 37-year-old schoolteacher from New Hampshire. She'd been chosen from thousands of ordinary people who wanted to venture into space. Hundreds of students from the school where she taught watched today's disastrous mission. She was killed in America's first fatal mission in space.
Well, James Wilkinson, is it at all possible at this early stage to say what went wrong?
No, I think obviously it's not certain what went wrong. If you look at the pictures, you can see that there was a hint of a fire before the massive explosion. But of course there will be a major inquiry, and then we will find out what actually happened.
Now we're actually watching the slow motion of the spacecraft as it took off,
yes, you can
and
see
went
just
out across Cape Canaveral.
The lick of flame along the back of the external tank there, that's what houses the liquid hydrogen. At the bottom half of the external tank, the liquid oxygen is at the top half. Certainly the flames crept up the back of the shuttle for a while of the external tank, and then it seemed to explode just catastrophically. I mean, there's absolutely no way in which anybody could have survived that.
So that parachute we saw, which comes shortly after all of this, cannot have been possibly a survivor?
Oh, no. No, that was a paramedic who was being parachuted in from a C-130 aircraft that had gone to see if there was any rescue work to be done.
How much fuel would have been on board there, James?
Well, they have 1.5 million pounds of fuel, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. It's really a firebomb, in fact, because it has an enormous amount of power, obviously, to get the shuttle out of Earth orbit. The fuel at that stage, when it was exploding, was being pumped along 17-inch thick pipes at a colossal rate into the combustion chamber, where it was burning at some 3,500 degrees centigrade. So the heat and the fuel is absolutely colossal inside there.
And as I understand it, the point at which it exploded was a point of maximum stress as it went through.
Yes, at that particular time, maximum dynamic pressure. The shuttle is at its most vulnerable, if you like. But clearly there was obviously some sort of leakage or some burn through, and of course once that sort of thing starts, it's a train of errors and nothing can stop it.
Is it apparent to you, watching those pictures and listening to what Mission Control is saying, that they had any idea that some disaster was creeping up on them?
I would have imagined that the astronauts and Mission Control would have had a few seconds of indication that something was going to happen, because you saw yourself the flame creeping up the outside of the external tank. In fact, there was a silence from Mission Control after the accident. I'm sure they were just too shell-shocked to say anything. As for the astronauts themselves, they probably had less than a second knowledge that something was going to go wrong,
So
and
there
I'm
was
sure
no
they knew nothing
chance
about it.
of putting any emergency drill into operation?
No, there are
anytime?
emergency drills. If they have to abort the flight, they can come down in the sea, they can come down back at the Kennedy Space Center, and there are rescue vehicles around. But that was just too catastrophic for anybody to survive.
It almost seems tasteless to speculate at this stage, James, but what does this mean for the shuttle program?
Well, it means a complete disaster for the shuttle program. It's been dogged with trouble, as we've heard. I would imagine everything won't be put on ice now. It means that Britain's own astronaut, Nigel Wood, won't be going up into space in the summer. It could mean the postponement of the shuttle program for many, many months until they find out exactly what went wrong. And it'll be a brave astronaut who will go up again.
James Wilkinson, thank you very much for explaining that. And we will, of course, bring you any further news on the shuttle disaster during the course of the programme. And I should tell you that there will be a special programme on the mission that went wrong on BBC Two at 6:50. That's a news night special with all the up-to-date news on this terrible tragedy at Cape Kennedy. To the explosion on board the shuttle. This is what he had to say.
The way the President found out about it is he was in the Oval Office with a group of senior staff preparing for some questions with a group of network correspondents and anchors that were having lunch in the White House today regarding the budget and the State of the Union. The Vice President and the Foreign Policy Advisor, John Poindexter, came in with others and informed the President that the news had just broken. We immediately adjourned our Oval Office meeting and went into an adjoining room, the president's study, where there's a television, and the president then began to review television reports of the explosion there shortly after the launch. So once again, the president is concerned. He is saddened. He is very anxious to have more information on it. At the moment, as I say, we're learning most of our information from what the public is getting.
What is your best information as to the condition of the crew, Larry, at this point?
We don't have any more information than what is being provided to the public on television. Hopefully later we will be able to get some, and that's the president's first priority, is to find out what information that is available. We just don't have any more. No, we have not from the Oval Office.
And we've just received the last pictures of the 7 astronauts before they left on their fatal mission, including, of course, the first woman civilian to go into space, Krista McAuliffe, who said that she hoped that her 6 days in orbit would teach people that space is for everyone. And that was the 6 o'clock news on Tuesday, the 28th of January, the day that America watched in horror as the 25th flight of the space shuttle turned from triumph to disaster in the space of just over a minute. Challenger was 9 miles out over the Atlantic when she exploded, killing all of the 7 people on board.
You could see right before the explosion, at the external tank where it attaches to the shuttle, a flame appeared to break out between the external tank and the shuttle.
Tom, this has never happened before. I know you are aware that there are contingency plans for such an event. Because it's never happened before, I think possibly many people even involved are not aware of what they are. Do they have ships standing by?
There are recovery ships standing by, and they do go through procedures for launch aborts. There is worst case scenario. Let's go now to the live picture. We see a parachute.
But there were, in fact, no survivors. That parachute was a paramedic going to the rescue, but all 7 people were killed. Let me remind you that at 6:50 on BBC 2, there will be a Newsnight special. But from the 6 o'clock news now, good night.